July of 1947, something fell out of the sky over the New Mexico desert. The United States Army told the world it was a weather balloon. Few simple strips of foil and balsa wood, nothing more, case closed, go home. There was a woman standing inside that story, who knew the Army was lying. Her name was Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, an Army Air Force flight nurse stationed at Roswell. And on the night that wreckage came in, she wasn't handed a weather balloon. She was handed a survivor, a living thing pulled from the crash. And for the next several weeks, she sat alone in a locked room and did something no human being had ever officially done before. She held a conversation with it. What it told her was so dangerous that she was sworn to secrecy under threat. She was interrogated. Transcripts were stamped top secret and locked away. She was warned in no uncertain terms, never to speak of it again for the rest of her life. And she didn't. For nearly 60 years, she said nothing. She let the world keep believing in the weather balloon, until she was dying. Because in 2007, an elderly woman mailed a stack of documents to a writer she had never met, with a letter that said, in effect, "I don't have long left and the truth is going to die with me, unless I hand it to someone." Inside that envelope was a transcript of what the alien actually said. 300 pages of it, the origin of the human race, reason we forget our past lives, the truth about every religion on Earth, and the single reason all of it was buried in the first place. This is the story they classified. This is the story she was ordered to take to her grave. This is the story of the Roswell alien interview. And by the end of this video, you're gonna understand exactly why they tried so hard to make sure you never heard it. Let's start with the part everyone thinks they already know, because the official version falls apart faster than you'd expect. On July 7th, 1947, a rancher named Mac Brazel reported a debris field roughly 75 miles northwest of Roswell. Strange material scattered across the ground. The local airbase, Roswell Army Airfield, sent men out to investigate, and on July 8th, they did something the military almost never does. They told the truth, or at least part of it. The base put out a press release announcing they had recovered a flying disc. For a few hours, it was real, it was in the papers. The United States government had a crashed flying saucer, and then just as fast, the story changed. Within hours, the disc became a balloon. The headline got walked back. The men who'd handled the debris were told to forget what they touched. And for most of history, that's where the Roswell story sits. A fight over foil and rubber, and what a rancher did or didn't see in a field. Matilda MacElroy's account starts where the public story ends. According to the documents she left behind, the debris wasn't the important part. The important part was that 2 occupants came out of that craft. One of them was already dead, killed on impact. The other one was not. And here's the first detail that should make the hair on your arms stand up. Survivor didn't look like the little gray figure from 1,000 bad movies in the way you'd expect. It was small, around 3.5 feet tall, with a large head and a slight gray body, but it had no mouth, no nose to speak of, no ears, no digestive system. Nothing you would need to eat, breathe, or speak. By every standard of human biology, this thing should not have been able to communicate at all. So the Army did what the Army does. They brought in specialists, doctors, intelligence officers, people trained to extract information. And every single one of them failed, because you cannot interrogate something that has no mouth and doesn't respond to a single word you say. Every one of them failed except for Matilda, because Matilda noticed something the others didn't. She started receiving impressions, thoughts that weren't hers arriving in her own mind, in her own language, fully formed. Being was communicating telepathically. And for whatever reason, out of every trained professional in that building, she was the only one tuned to the right frequency to hear it. The being later confirmed this was not an accident. It had selected her. All the people in that facility, she was the one it chose to talk to. That's when the real interviews began. They moved her into a room with the survivor and essentially got out of the way. A young nurse and a being from somewhere else, sitting across from each other, having a conversation the rest of humanity wasn't allowed to hear. The being gave her a name to call it. A name that has echoed through UFO circles ever since. It called itself Errol. The first thing Errol explained to her was that the body sitting in that chair wasn't actually it at all. The body was a vehicle, manufactured device built to be operated the same way you'd operate a car or a uniform. Errol was the thing inside the body, and what was inside the body, Errol said, could never die. Now, if your skepticism is already kicking in, good, hold on to that. Because the question of whether any of this is real is one we're going to put under a microscope later, and the answer is a lot messier than either side wants to admit. But to understand why this interview was so dangerous that it had to be buried, you first have to understand what Errol actually claimed. And it goes a lot further than aliens are real. Errol told Matilda that it was what the transcripts call an ISB. It stands for Immortal Spiritual Being. And according to Errol, it's what you are too, every human being, every alien. Errol described all conscious life as these immortal units of awareness, beings that have no mass, no location, no real beginning, and crucially no end. The body dies, the ISB does not, it simply moves on. Errol claimed to be unimaginably old, not hundreds of years, not thousands. Errol described having existed for so long that human concepts of time stopped being useful. Trillions of years, across countless bodies, on countless worlds. The little gray body in that chair was just the most recent uniform it happened to be wearing. And Errol wasn't a lost tourist or a scientist gathering samples. Errol was a soldier, an officer, a pilot, and an engineer serving in something called the Domain Expeditionary Force. Which raises the obvious question. A force belonging to what? And the answer is where this stops being a crash story and starts becoming something much bigger. According to Errol, our entire region of space is claimed territory. It belongs to a vast interstellar civilization Errol simply called the Domain. The Domain, as Errol described it, is enormous beyond human comprehension. A civilization that has been methodically expanding across galaxies, absorbing star systems, mapping and claiming the physical universe piece by piece. Its base of operations, Errol said, sits in the region of space we recognize as the stars of the Big Dipper, and its expeditionary forces, the explorers, the engineers, the officers like Errol, push out ahead of it, surveying new territory and securing it for the future. Earth, Errol explained almost casually, had been noticed. Our little solar system sits in a strategically useful corner of the galaxy, and the Domain had taken an interest in it for reasons that had nothing to do with us. The crash near Roswell wasn't first contact, wasn't a diplomatic mission. It was an accident. A Domain craft on a routine operation that suffered a malfunction, triggered, Errol said, by a nuclear detonation in the area that disrupted the vehicle's navigation. They fell because we were busy splitting atoms in the desert. So far, this is already a staggering claim. An immortal soldier from a galaxy-spanning empire, downed by our own atomic testing. But it's still, in a sense, a comfortable story. It keeps us as the curiosity, the locals, the planet someone flew over, and then Errol took it somewhere genuinely disturbing. Because Errol told Matilda that long before the Domain ever showed up, already had an owner. And that owner did not have our best interests in mind. Errol described an older power, a civilization that predated the Domain in this region by a very long time, that Errol called the Old Empire. And by the time of the interview, the Old Empire was a decaying, corrupt, paranoid government. But it still ran the operation that mattered most to us. Because according to Errol, is a prison, not a colony, not a wildlife preserve, a prison. Errol told Matilda that for thousands upon thousands of years, the Old Empire had used this planet as a dumping ground, a place to exile the beings it considered undesirable. The list of who got sent here is the part that lingers. It wasn't just criminals and the violent. It was also artists, free thinkers, revolutionaries, intellectuals. Anyone the Old Empire considered too creative, too independent, too difficult to control. They were rounded up from across the galaxy, stripped of their identities, and shipped to a quarantined rock at the edge of nowhere. Rock is the one you're standing on. Now, if that were the whole story, it would still just be a cosmic exile. Banishment, bad enough, survivable, because an immortal being could eventually figure out where it was and leave, and that, Errol said, is exactly the problem the Old Empire had to solve. How do you imprison a being that can't die and can't be physically chained? The answer they came up with is, without exaggeration, the single most unsettling idea in the entire interview. You make them forget. Errol told Matilda that the Old Empire built a system around Earth specifically designed to erase memory. When one of these exiled ISBs first arrived, its memory was wiped. Its name, its history, its abilities, everything that made it who it was gone. It would wake up as a blank, helpless newcomer, with no idea it had ever been anything else. The truly diabolical part is what happens when the body dies, because, in a normal universe, death is the escape hatch. The ISBE leaves the corpse and is free to go wherever it wants. The Old Empire couldn't allow that, so according to Errol, they set up stations. Errol placed them in the space around Earth that act like a net. The instant a being departs a dying body, it gets detected, captured, and pulled in, and then they do it again. They wipe the memory a second time. They hit the being with what Errol described as an intense electronic shock, scrubbing away any trace of the life that just ended, and then they implant false instructions and send it right back down to be born again into a new body, with no memory of the life before. That, Errol said, is what reincarnation actually is. Not a spiritual journey, not karma, a processing loop. A machine designed to take immortal beings, blank them, and recycle them endlessly. So they never accumulate enough memory to realize they're trapped. Never figure out where they are, never escape. Generation after generation, life after life, the same beings cycling through the same prison, convinced each time that they're brand new, and that this short, forgetful human life is all they've ever had. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes everything. If Errol is telling the truth, then you have lived before many times. And the reason you can't remember a single second of it is not that there's nothing to remember. It's that someone made very sure you wouldn't. And it gets worse because Errol said this system was never shut off. The old empire fell into ruin. The wardens, in a sense, abandoned the prison. The machinery kept running its own, automated, mindless, still capturing, still wiping, still recycling, long after anyone was left minding the controls, which would mean the trap is still operating today, right now. So how does anyone know any of this? How would a domain officer have such detailed knowledge of a prison system built by a rival empire? That's the next thread Errol pulled, and it's the reason Errol was in our solar system in the first place. Errol told Matilda that the domain had its own painful history with this planet. Thousands of years ago, Errol placed it around 8,000 years before the interview. The domain sent a battalion of 3,000 of its own officers into this region on a mission, and they vanished, every one of them. The battalion was lost, and the domain eventually concluded that its own soldiers had been caught in the very same trap, captured by the old empire's amnesia machinery, wiped and dumped into the reincarnation cycle on Earth, where they've been reborn as ordinary humans ever since, no memory of who they really are. Which means, according to Errol, some of the people walking around on Earth right now are lost domain soldiers who don't know it, and one of the domain's long-term reasons for monitoring Earth is to eventually find them. From there, Errol walked Matilda through a history of Earth that contradicts nearly everything we're taught. Errol claimed that life here didn't arise neatly on its own, that the planet's biology is a patchwork, the result of various beings and experiments seeding life here over enormous spans of time, which is why the fossil record is so strange and so full of gaps. Errol described monuments like the Great Pyramids and ancient megaliths not as primitive human achievements, but as part of the conditioning, physical anchors built into hypnotic programming, meant to keep the population obedient and looking in the wrong direction. And then Errol said the thing that, more than anything else, would have made this interview radioactive to anyone in power. Errol told Matilda that the world's major religions were not divine revelations. They were tools. According to Errol, the old empire's control system didn't just erase memory. It installed false memories, hypnotic implants. Among the most powerful implants it used were religious ones. Imagery of gods, of judgment, of heaven and hell, all-powerful authorities who must be obeyed and worshipped. These were deliberately planted into the minds of the imprisoned beings as a control mechanism, a way to keep an entire population docile, fearful, waiting for salvation from above instead of looking for the exit. Errol's claim was that this is why so many ancient religions, separated by oceans and thousands of miles, share the same suspicious architecture: a sky father, a flood, a savior, a final judgment. Not because they independently discovered the same truth, because they were running the same software, the same implant, distributed across a captive population. And the light at the end of the tunnel, the warm, welcoming light that people who nearly die so often describe, the light we've been taught to walk toward, Errol suggested that was part of it too. Not a doorway to peace, a lure. The final step of the trap, designed to draw a departing being calmly back toward the processing station so the cycle can begin again. Take a breath, because that's the full shape of it now. An immortal, you exiled to a prison planet, your memory wiped, your past lives erased, your religions handed to you as a leash, and even your death engineered to send you straight back into the loop. That is what a young army nurse was told in a locked room in 1947, and now you can probably feel the obvious question pressing in, the same one Matilda must have felt. Is any of this actually true, or is it the most elaborate story ever told? As that question has two very convincing answers, and they cancel each other out. Theory 1. Every word of it is true. Take the believers seriously first, because their case is stronger than skeptics like to admit. Start with Matilda herself. By her account, she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She didn't sell this story in 1947 when it could have made her famous. She didn't write a book at the height of UFO mania in the 1990s. She sat on it for 60 years, kept a top-secret oath that could have ruined her, only released it when she was dying, and there was nothing left for anyone to take from her. That's not the behavior of a hoaxer chasing money or attention. That's the behavior of someone trying to clear a conscience before the clock runs out. Then there's the content itself. The interview doesn't read like a sci-fi adventure. There's no battle, no romance, no dramatic rescue. It reads like a dry briefing. An engineer patiently explaining systems to someone who doesn't understand them yet. And it's internally consistent across 300 pages. The physics of the ISB, the structure of the domain, mechanics of the amnesia trap, They all lock together without contradicting each other, which is genuinely hard to fake over that length. And believers point out that a lot of what Errol described in 1947 lines up uncomfortably well with things that came later. The idea that nuclear testing draws UFO attention, the recurring reports of small gray beings, the near-death tunnel of light that wasn't widely discussed in popular culture until decades after the interview was supposedly recorded. To a believer, Matilda couldn't have known to invent those details when she did. So if that's all true, case closed, right? The most important document in human history was nearly lost forever, and a dying nurse saved it. Well, not so fast. Theory 2. It's a hoax, and the fingerprints are everywhere. Here's the problem, and it's a serious one. When you lay Errol's cosmology next to the belief system of the Church of Scientology, it doesn't just rhyme, it practically matches line for line. Scientology teaches that you are an immortal spiritual being it calls a thetan. Errol calls it an ISB. Scientology teaches that Thetans have lived countless past lives and have been deliberately made to forget. Errol describes exactly that. Scientology's deeper teachings describe ancient galactic empires, beings exiled to Earth, and implanted false memories, including religious ones, used to control the population. Errol describes exactly that, almost beat for beat. Prison planet, the memory wipe, the implants, the recycling of souls. These are not new ideas Errol introduced to the world. They are ideas that were already circulating for decades before the book ever appeared. And the man who published the transcripts, Lawrence R. Spencer, has documented ties to those very ideas. So a skeptic's reconstruction is brutally simple. A writer familiar with this cosmology wrote a novel, framed it as the deathbed confession of a conveniently unfindable nurse, and released it as real. There is no independent record proving Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy was ever the person the book describes. There's no physical transcript anyone can carbon date. There's no Errol. There's a paperback. Whole thing has the structure of a known religious mythology wearing a 1947 costume. That's the nail in the coffin. A nurse who can't be verified, telling a story we can trace to an existing belief system, published by someone connected to that belief system. Hoax. Done. Except it isn't done, because here's where it loops back on itself. And this is the part that keeps people up at night. If it's a hoax, it's a strangely honest one. The book was published with an open admission that its authenticity is unverified. Con artist trying to start a religion usually insists their text is the literal truth and dares you to disprove it. This one says, essentially, decide for yourself. That's not how a scam behaves, and the Scientology parallel cuts both ways. Skeptics say the interview copied Scientology. There's a mirror image argument that's just as hard to dismiss. What if both are describing, however imperfectly, however commercially, the same underlying idea that's been surfacing in human consciousness over and over for thousands of years, the exile, forgetting, the trap of rebirth? You find versions of it in Gnostic texts written 2,000 years ago, where the physical world is a prison built by a false god and salvation means remembering your true origin. You find it in mystical traditions across the planet that all whisper the same thing, that you are not your body, you've forgotten something enormous, and that waking up is the whole point. The interview didn't invent that idea. The interview is just the latest, strangest container for an idea humanity cannot seem to stop telling itself. So which is it? A nurse's deathbed truth, or a novelist's clever fiction? The honest answer is that the more you dig, the worse the footing gets. Every piece of evidence for one side has a counter for the other, and you end up exactly where Matilda left you, holding 300 pages and a choice about what to believe. There's one more thread before the end of this, and it's the human one. After the interviews ended, Matilda's life took the shape you'd expect for someone who knew too much. By her account, she was interrogated about what Errol had told her. She was sworn to secrecy. She was reassigned and, in effect, made to disappear back into an ordinary life, carrying the most extraordinary secret on Earth and forbidden from saying a word of it. Errol itself, she said, eventually departed. The ISB left the little gray body behind and was simply gone, its work in that room finished. And Matilda did what she was told. For 6 decades, she said nothing. She let herself become a nobody, an unverifiable name, precisely because that's what burying a story requires. Not just classifying a document, erasing the person who carries it until no one can be sure they ever existed at all. Which, if you think about it, is the exact same method Errol described the old empire using on all of us. Take the witness, strip the identity, and make certain no one remembers. Whether that's a chilling coincidence or the final proof of the whole story is, once again, up to you. That still leaves the biggest question of all. Of everything, Errol said, the immortality, the empires, the prison, recycled souls. What was the one piece that was so dangerous it had to be classified, sworn against, and buried for 60 years? Why this story and not 1,000 other UFO tales? What exactly were they trying to bury? Here's the answer. They didn't bury it because it said aliens are real. Think about it. Governments have survived UFO sightings, crash rumors, and grainy saucer footage for the better part of a century. A flying disc in the desert is embarrassing. It is not dangerous. If the only thing Matilda had to report was the craft was real and the pilot was small and gray, they'd have let her talk eventually. Disclosure of life beyond Earth would shake people up for a news cycle and then become background noise. That's not what Errol handed her. What Errol handed her was a manual for escaping control. And that is the most dangerous thing any document can contain. Strip the interview down to its core, and here is what's actually written on those pages. You are not your body. You are an immortal being who has lived countless lives. You have been deliberately made to forget every one of them. Fear of death that runs your decisions is based on a lie, because the part of you that matters cannot die. The religions that tell you to obey, to wait, to look upward and submit, were installed as a cage, a way to keep you kneeling and looking the wrong direction. And the way out, the only way out Errol ever pointed to, isn't a savior, a government, or a ritual. It's memory, it's awareness. It's an immortal being remembering what it is and simply refusing to be afraid anymore. Now ask yourself what happens to a system of control, any system on any planet, when the people inside it stop being afraid of death, stop trusting the authorities that govern them, and stop waiting to be saved. It ends. That's what happens. Every form of power humans have ever built runs on those three levers: fear of death, faith in authority, and the hope of future rescue. Errol's interview is a step-by-step demonstration that all three are manufactured, and worse, that they were manufactured on purpose by something that wanted you obedient. A weather balloon cover-up protects a secret, a document that tells billions of people their fear is a leash and their obedience is engineered, that doesn't threaten a secret. It threatens the entire structure that sits on top of every secret. That's why it had to be buried. Not because it was unbelievable, because of what would happen if even a fraction of people believed it. You don't classify a story like that for 75 years to protect the public from disappointment. You classify it because a population that internalizes it becomes ungovernable in the most fundamental way. Not violent, not rebellious, unafraid. And an unafraid population is the one thing no system of control has ever known how to handle. So a nurse was sworn to silence. Pages were stamped and locked away, and the woman who heard it was quietly erased until she was nothing but an unverifiable name. Exactly the way you bury the most dangerous idea there is, not by arguing with it, by making sure no one is ever quite sure it was real, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe Matilda MacElroy never existed and Errol is ink on a page. But notice what you're feeling right now at the end of this, that itch. What if? That small refusal to fully let it go. That feeling is the whole reason a story like this survives being buried. You can classify a document. You can erase a witness. The one thing you can't quite delete is the question. Once it's in someone's head, question of whether, somewhere underneath the forgetting, you've heard all of this before. Now, maybe a deathbed confession written on paper isn't enough for you. Maybe you need to actually see one of these beings. Not a description, not a transcript, but real footage, a face. Eyes that blink back at the camera. Because in 2011, a mysterious channel uploaded exactly that. 4 short clips of what might be the most realistic alien footage ever recorded. A small gray being, sitting, standing, blinking, moving, leaked by someone who claimed to be smuggling it out of a government archive. And the second the videos started spreading, the uploader vanished without a single word and was never heard from again. It's been analyzed frame by frame for over a decade, and no one can agree whether it's the real thing or the most expensive hoax in internet history. That's the story of Skinny Bob, and if the Roswell interview left you with chills, this one is going to finish the job. Go watch it next.